Hello, welcome to this substance pattern tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to be having a look at filters. It's something I don't really sort of look at very much, but I thought, they're really useful and it would be handy to tell people about them. So there are a few different kinds of filters. There are kind of processing filters and there are effects filters. So up here we have our processing filters. So we've got things like bevel and blur. We've got color balance and color correct, and as we go down we get these effect layers. We have finishes and effects which do all sorts of different things, and a few more processing ones down the bottom. So to start with, we're going to have a look at some blurring effects. They're ones that I use most often, I think. So in the next section we'll start to have a look at blurs. Okay, so what we'll need here, I've just got a basic high-res 2D plane here, and I'm going to add a layer to it, and to that layer I'm just going to turn everything off but colour. So I'm going to alt click colour, there we go, and then we'll go and find a nice pattern in here to apply. Let's use one of these fabric-y patterns and see what happens. There we go, let's have that one. Okay, so once you have your layer and you have something in it, you can right click on the layer and add a filter, and this will apply at the layer level. You could do the same for black masks, but you would do that at the black mask level, of course. Okay, so now we have an empty filter slot. If I go to my filter directory and slide up to the top, we've got 3 blurs. So the first blur is very simple. It's the standard blur, and we can drag and drop that in, and then with our intensity we can make it either more blurry or less blurry, or sharp if you like. So very straightforward one, but very handy because I have a tendency not to like sharp edges, so I'll often put a little blur in just to make it a little bit more soft. Okay, so the directional blur, or blur directional, if you drag that in, is very similar, except it is going to blur in a direction. So if I up that so we can see what's going on, we then have this angle whereby we can adjust the direction of the blur. There we go. Again, I'd probably not put an awful lot into it. Oops, somewhere around there perhaps, and then adjust my direction until it gets to where I want it. Let's press F there. There we go. So that's the directional blur. Now my most favourite one is the blur slope, and I think of the blur slope as something that will break up an edge, because it almost clings to the border between black and white. So where you have the meeting of the black and white, it really shows up the blur, whereas elsewhere it doesn't show at all. Really handy for breaking up tiles. We might have a look at that in a little while. So we have our intensity, and sort of by default it's really quite strong. So if I turn it up, you may want it to be a little bit finer, in which case the intensity divider will help you. So if I put this intensity divider to 10, I will get much smaller blurs. Even increasing it up, it won't blur as much as if my divider were at 1. And if I go to 100, it will be smaller still, and the 1000 are smaller still. In fact, so small I can't barely see it. So let's pop it to 10 and just drag that back a little bit. There we go, just to give it some roughness. And one of the things about this is we have a mode. Currently it's on blur mode, so we're getting it blurred and we're getting the full range of greys from white to black. But I can put this to min and it will give us like a min max effect, min in this case, so it's only going to show the minimum value for that pixel. So if I put this back to blur, you'll see that it's sort of blurring out and blurring in, but if I go to min, we keep our shape and it just eats away at the underlying shape rather than expanding it, and that's really great for chipping away at things like tiles or edges, or something along those lines. Similarly, you can go the other way and go max, and that will essentially keep the shape intact but expand out. So you really have options. And one of the things that I'll use this for most often is if I'm doing like a tiling wall or a tiling floor. I'm just going to go and find my tile generator in here. If I just type in tile, there we go. I'm going to drag and drop the tile generator onto there. Whoops. And then adjust it a little. The pattern I want to be a square. Pattern transform, I'm going to make it a little smaller, so I've got some gaps between my tiles. There we go. And now my blur slope is already set, it's on max, so it's expanding. I want it to be on min, I want to chip away at those edges, and I could use that for basically either height or colour or both to make a nice tiled effect. So that's the blurs really. When we come back, we'll have a look at some of the other processing options we have, so I'll talk to you then. Okay, so let's have a look at another filter. This time we're going to have a look at high pass. So I'm just going to add a new layer here, and then we'll go and find something in our patterns, perhaps something different. Well, let's pick these stars. So I'll drag and drop those into the color or base color, and alt click color there to turn everything else off. Okay, so high pass will give me the difference between shapes. It defines the outside and the inside of a shape when there's no difference. So if I add a filter to this and then go and find the high pass in my filters, where is it? It's here somewhere. There it is. I'll drag and drop that in. Excuse me. So where it's grey, there is no difference. There is no shape there. There's no transition. Where it's black, it's approaching a change, and where it's white, there has been a change, and now it's going to grey again. So that gives us some options to vary one of our channels somewhere according to the difference between shapes. So we can do that by adding a an anchor point here, which allows us to reference this layer from other layers. And then I'm going to turn it off because I don't actually want to see that layer at all. Let's add a new layer above this, and we'll use, I don't know, this brass perhaps. And now in any of these channels here we can access our layer, our layer with the high pass filter on. So I'm going to use roughness, so I'm going to click into roughness, go to anchor points and select my anchor point. And now that's picked up the anchor point, but it's picking up the roughness channel. So I haven't got a roughness channel, I'm just going to use my base color channel. So if we zoom in there, we can see where the filter is, or where our layer was black on the outside of the shapes, it's very shiny, and as it's moving over is becoming very dull and then coming to a very neutral tone. If we go back to our high pass filter, we should be able to expand that or contract it. And also on the layer we have our levels. So if I open up the levels there, I can invert this switchly simply by flipping my black and white output channels there, and then we have an effect without actually having anything in this channel. It's all referring to this channel to get its information. Okay, so that's a little bit about the high pass filter. When we come back, we'll have a look at, or start to have a look at, some of the color filters that we could use. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so let's have a look at some color ones here. So we have a few color ones to work with. We're going to start off with the a gradient here. So I'm going to need a black and white image to work on. So I'm going to add a fill and then pop my base color in only. And then in the images here, I want a gradient. Well, it's, I don't know, linear one, I think. Let's pop that in there. Okay, so with this color gradient filter, we can change a black and white image to have color information. So if I add a filter in here, I can drag and drop that over, and initially it's got black, grey and white in it, and that's applied to our gradient image, and you can see it's only using 3 colors, so it's become a bit rough. You can increase the amount of colors it uses, say up to 4, but you have to be aware that each of these colors is applied at a position, and the last 2 are both at position 1, so essentially you won't see one or the other. Well, you'll only see one of them. So I'm just going to adjust my sliders down a little bit here to leave room for this color, and then this one, whoops, no, I'm going to make this one a slightly darker grey, and then this one a slightly lighter grey, and then at the bottom we'll make that white, which will give us a a little bit more of a gradient. So obviously you don't have to use black and white, as that would be useless. You can do this with colours. So if we go in with a dark red here, not quite 100% dark, there we go, and close that off, and then this one will have a slightly lighter version, and this one again a slightly lighter version. Actually I need to go more this direction, don't I, and this direction, there we go, and then finally somewhere around there perhaps. So you can add multiple colours, you can change all the colours you want. They don't have to be the same colour, you can go lots of different colours, to have some sort of psychedelic multicoloured thing. But yes, it's not something I use very often, I have to say, because I find it a little bit clunky, but I wanted to show you it was here as an option. Okay, so now we've got a colour layer, let's have a look at what we can do with some of the other colour options here. So if I leave this alone, I can simply drag and drop one of these above it. So if I drop colour balance above, we then get highlights, midtones and shadows. So if I move our highlights towards cyan there, and our midtones towards cyan, and our shadows towards cyan, you'll see it's sort of becoming a little bit more dusty. If I turn this off and on again, you'll get the idea. It's a bit subtle without that. I'll quite often turn a layer off and on just to see if anything actually did. So with that, you can do that with any of the channels, of course. So we could pop it towards magenta, oops, I won't pop that one back, there we go, and now there's a kind of magenta-y, purpley kind of tinge going on, and again off and on, and you'll get the effect that's happening. Okay, so that's color balance, and of course you don't have to do it on a single colour. You can do it on all sorts of colours to get the kind of effects you're after. So let me delete that one out. So we have colour correct, and again, if I pop that in, we'll get shadows, midtones and highlights, and contrast, luminosity and saturation for each. So for example, I could take the saturation out of the shadow end, and as you see, that's really kind of taken the redness out of that. And if I do that for the rest of it, I'll end up with a black and white image again, or a pretty much black and white image. There we go. Let's come this way, and there we go, somewhere around there. Luminosity we can change, you know, increase or decrease, and similarly contrast, decrease or increase. That's interesting. Now I've just got a completely posterized version. There we go. So that's color correct. Let's just take that out a bit. I'll often, you know, when I use that thing, it's often to take a bit of saturation out, because I find when colors are too bright, unless I'm doing something toony, you know, too bright tends to break the illusion. And what else have we got? We have a color match here. So if I pop that on, we should be able to change this to get something slightly different. It seems to be just color matching it to exactly where I want it, which isn't really what I want. Yeah, so we can update our hue, our chroma, our luma. That's it, luma. So now we've got our gradient back, but we can actually change, you know, the color we're using, you know, without having to change each level of color on our gradient, which is perfect. Sorry, I was expecting that to happen as soon as I came in. I'd forgotten that I needed to update the luma to make that work. Let's have a look at the chroma. Yeah, that's something. And we can even do a hue shift, maybe. No, there we go. Okay, so that's a couple of the color nodes. When we come back, we're going to have a look at some of the effects, and I think I'll just go through the surface effects first. That will be quite a quick one, and then we'll have a look at some of the actual material kind of effects. So I will talk to you then. Okay, so we've had a look at a few processing filters, and now I'm going to open up one of the samples. Let's discard that, and what I want is the preview sphere, because this will have some baked maps which will help with the effects. So let me get rid of all these layers. There we go, and we can start from scratch. One thing I like to do when I open this scene actually is in the display settings, it has a glare and vignette on, which I find a little bit distractive. Vignette's not so bad, but the glare is awful. So I'm going to turn that off. There we go. Okay, so we'll start out with this peeling paint, and what we need for that is a couple of layers. So I'll just create a couple of layers, and the first one I'm going to put I think some sort of metal in. Let's go down the list. Let's have this iron, not hammered. Let's just have a grainy one. There we go. Can't see anything because the top layer is obscuring it. And the top layer we're going to use one of our plastics, I think. Let's use this plastic here, and this is going to take the place of our paint layer. Let's just make it a bit more industrially. Okay, so now if I apply a filter, the peeling paint filter to this, we will get a peeling paint effect. So if I add filter and pop that into the filter slot, there we go, we get a nice peeled paint effect. So we're seeing our metal from below and, you know, our paint on top, and we have all sorts of options here to play with. So we can change the peeling distance, the level of peeling, just how peeled it might be. We have an air bubble density. If I turn that right up, you might be able to actually see it. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to bring that down a bit because it's a bit much. We have our flaking density, so we can take the flaking right down or put it right up. We have a flaking amount for X and Y, which you can adjust to your needs. We can actually use the curvature map, which is down here, or not. And if I do that, you'll see that the edges all come back in again, which is not a bad effect actually. And then we have our curvature distance if you've got a curvature on, and I can reduce that to make the edges a little more subtle, or I can really increase it to use a bit of brute force to coin a phrase. And if I reduce the contrast here, we'll get kind of sharper cracks at those edges. One thing to note here is we do have some technical parameters. One of the ones I'll often use is the height range. For example, the height might be a little bit much in comparison to other layers. It's okay on this one, but in that case you can reduce the height range to reduce the height effect that you're going to get, or you could decrease it to, you know, overblow it a bit if it's not enough. There we go. So that's the peeled paint. While we're here, we might as well do the rust weathered. So if I delete this layer, now this one I've got my metal layer, and I'm just going to drag and drop this above that, and there we go. It's applied a nice rusted effect over the top of our metal layer there. And of course we have some parameters to play with. I can take the spreading down so it's a bit more subtle. We can make it a little smoother. There we go. There's a varnish damage, which I think is probably affecting the roughness map in there somewhere. We have a drip intensity and drip samples. So if if it's not performing very well, turning the samples down will give you a rougher kind of effect, but it will perform better. There we go. And we have a drip smoothness, just how smooth those drips are. If I increase that and that, and then up and down, doesn't seem to be doing an awful lot. I'm sure it is, it's just I'm not seeing it, or not demonstrating it adequately enough, shall we say. No, there we go. As you can see, this relies on some image inputs, which are our curvature map, our ambient occlusion map, and our position map. So if you haven't got those maps baked for your object, it won't show up, basically. Okay, so that's those two. I think there's an oil paint effect and a watercolor effect I wanted to show you. So we'll have a look at those next. Okay, so I've just deleted out that material, and I'm going to add in a smart material. I want something that's got a bit of contrast to it so that we can see what's happening. So I'm going to use this machinery, and we've got some yellow areas, we've got some rusty areas, etc, etc, and that will help us show up what these are doing. Because if you have something that's not got any real detail or contrasting areas, this is hard to see. So in the filters we have our oil paint and we have our watercolor. So oil paint essentially will put an oil paint effect over the top of our material. So if I pop that in there, it will calculate, and you should be able to see now that that's got kind of brush strokes in it now, rather than just being plain. If I turn it off and on, you should be able to see it much better. You'll see it's going over kind of everything, which is not ideal on this particular material, but I could always turn off some layers here and turn that back on again, and I should at least maintain the shiny and dull areas from that material below. For that we have all sorts of different options down here. So we've got our effect intensity, so I could take that down if it was too much. I think subtlety is always good. we could have how many of the fine details it tries to maintain. There we go. Our roughness variation, roughness detail, normal intensity, and our strokes. Because this normal intensity, it's going to add in sort of details for the strokes. If I go down to the normal channel, whoops, no, it's not showing anything. That's probably because I'm doing the normal off. There we go. You can see then that we're getting the normal map from those brush strokes to, you know, give us that bit of extra detail. Let's go back up to the material. There we go. And we have all sorts of things down here. We've got color correction, we've got strokes. We can put some random scale into it, for example. We can do size XY to make them bigger or smaller as we want them. There we go. And yeah, I mean, it's an easy effect to put over the top of something to give it a real depth, which would take you a while to build yourself, essentially, either in Substance Designer or in Substance Painter. So yeah, I think it's a really great filter personally. I wish I'd not messed with the strokes size there, but there we go. Yeah, so play around with it, essentially. Adjust everything until it comes you know, as you want it. But yeah, that's I think that's a much nicer effect with it than without, especially if I was doing something, you know, in a really rough environment that looked, you know, wanted to look like it was hand painted rather than sprayed, somewhat along those lines. Okay, so that's the oil painter one. Let's delete that one out. And similarly, we have the watercolor one, which does a very similar job, but it's with watercolor. So let me pop that above there. No, I'm not adding it as a channel, adding it as a filter to a layer. I'm giving it its own layer above. This is a painting layer, but it's all set to pass through. So it's picking up what's below it and applying this to it. There we go. So again, if I turn it off and on, you'll see the difference it makes. It's gone more blurry, it's a bit more absorbed. We have options for that. So we've got our paper absorption, our accumulation type, so, you know, paint accumulates in areas. This is set to cavity. We could have it on peaks instead. We have border densities, which we can adjust. A lot of this doesn't appear to be actually making an awful lot of difference. Sometimes you need a different way of, you know, making it look. We also have paper options, so we can hide the paper entirely because the paper will be adding a texture. We have cross point edges. We can turn that off. Oh no, that's not very good with that off. Let's leave that on. We could also do a custom paper, so we could add our own paper texture underneath. If I turn that on, then we have our image input here, and we could put anything we want from our textures library in, and that will add that in. As you can see, that's showing up in various points. Let's turn that off, and then on, off and on. Might not be the right you know, paper for this or texture for this, but I just wanted to show you it was there and that you could actually adjust it in its own right. There we go. Okay, so again, this has got things on that you perhaps don't want. I perhaps wouldn't want it to affect the roughness because the underlying roughness is what I'm after. So the paint is, you know, a little bit shiny, the rust is not shiny at all, and if I put the rough on, it kind of merges it all into one. So we'll leave the rough off. Okay, so that's those two. Let's have a look what I've got left to look at. Well, there's all sorts to look at, but I'm going to finish off, I think, let's try water drops and other, which I haven't decided yet. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so we have this water drops. So if I drag and drop that above my metal here, it should spread lots of lovely water drops all over my model, which is terrific. We can adjust our drops amount, so we can increase that if we want to. We can adjust the scale of the drops, so we can make them larger or smaller depending upon how we want it. We can add some scaling variety to it, and it's just a really easy way of putting water on, water drops on something. So you're doing like a shower door, you want to have some water running down it, you have these options. So that's a fairly easy one. Yeah, you see there's some variety in how it's applying roughness and such like here. We've got some bigger drops, we have some smaller drops. Yeah, I like it. It's very handy. It saves a lot of messing about, trying to work it out yourself, with all sorts of different, textures to bring together and processes to apply to them. How do you do it? But, we have this water drops here to make it much, much easier for us. Okay, so that was water drops. Let me delete that one out. Now, I did want to show, and I forgot, the HSL, because we can use this to apply to either the whole stack or a single layer. So if I want to apply it to the whole stack, I'll put it above there, and then we have modes, so regular or perceptive, and then I can adjust my hues. We can adjust the saturation and the lightness of our layers underneath, all to well, not all two, but all pretty easily. Let's take the saturation back up again. Let's put the hue, I think it should be 0.5 is the original. Lightness is back down again. There we go. So yeah, really easy. Put it at the top of your stack and you can affect the whole of your all of your layers below. You could also add it, of course, on any particular layer. So for example, on my base metal here, I've got a base color. I could add my filter down here, drop the HSL into the slot, and now I can just affect that color underneath. I know I could just change the color itself, but now I have control. I can say, okay, my saturation's too high, I want to take it down just a little bit, or it's perhaps a bit too light or a bit too dark, and you can adjust it on the fly, only on that layer rather than having it over everything. Okay, so that's those two. I've got a couple of processing filters I want to have a look at. I say processing, I don't mean processing, I mean functional. So yes, I'll talk to you about those in the next bit. Okay, so we're just going to have a quick look at the height adjustments, and for that I'm going to go to a different sample. So open sample, let's discard that, and we want the tiling material because it's good for demonstrating. So as you can see, we've got our sample here and it's displacing, and it's a relatively simple setup, but we can adjust how the height behaves on this by using the height adjust filter. So if I drag that to the top, you'll see that actually it immediately changes, it immediately becomes a little bit finer. But then we have offset and multiply. So multiply is basically the strength of the displacement. So if I go down to 0 there, you'll see it's now flat. All I'm getting is the actual kind of other material properties there now. And as I go towards 1 is the kind of default, and then if I go even further, it will keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So for me, I generally do small adjustments, not big adjustments, but I'm just overdoing it here for effect or for demonstration purposes. So offset then is the position at which 0 is calculated. So you often think 0.5 grey is no displacement, and then positive displacement is then closer to white, and negative displacement is then closer to black. So this, I believe, adjusts that point, and as you can see, our whole plane moves and the effect gets slightly less as you adjust this. But again, for me, it's usually minor changes. You wouldn't change massively, because you might end up with a bit of your mesh displacing off into nowhere and splitting off from your mesh. So that's the height adjustment, just so you know it's there. It's not something I use very often, but it's sometimes nice, especially since you can put it above your whole stack and affect the whole stack, rather than just trying to do it on an individual layer. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show you was the PBR validation. So I'm going to reopen, let's discard that, the preview sphere, and I'm going to delete all of the layers when they come in, and then I'm just going to put a fill layer in. Let's have it as just colour, and then I'll give it a kind of mid colour, mid red. Okay, so PBR in render engines tends to work within different colour spaces. There's a couple of colour spaces, I believe they're called sRGB 30 and 50, but not all colours that you can use in Substance fall within those ranges. So the PBR validator will tell you which ones do and which ones don't. So down here we have our PBR validate material, or filter rather. If I drag and drop that above there, it's going to tell me whether it's good or bad, and in this case it's good. Great, it's red, it's in the middle, it's okay. But the closer to black I get, you'll see that the validator turns red, and that's an indication that that is now out of range. And as I come up a little bit, you'll see it comes to orange, which is kind of within tolerance. And then if I come up a little bit more, it will go to green, which is within tolerance. Now if you're exporting your maps and taking them into your engine, and they look a bit strange in places, it could be because some of your colours are out of range, and this will tell you what they are. So on the colour side, you can go right up to the top and it will stay green, but if you come over to the white side, you'll see that pure white is out of range. So you have to come down a teeny bit from white for it to be within range. And if I go down towards black, black is less tolerant, so it will go red a little bit before the white does. There we go. So it's gone to orange, and now it's at red, and I'm at black, pure black, and it is out of range. Similarly over this side, if I use pure black, it's out of range, and if I come up a bit, it will come back into range. And you'll notice on the colour side, the tolerance is much less. Almost anything below just under half there is out of range. If I go down just a little bit, we're heading towards suspect, and a little bit more, and it's out of range. So if you happen to know what your colour space is within your engine, you have a choice of sRGB 50 and 30 here. So if I switch to 50, it will, whoops, wrong one, there we go, it will react differently again. So it's likely that fewer colours are within range here. There we go. So yes, when you've finished your material, you can always run it through here to pick up any issues that your render engine might have a problem with, and adjust them accordingly. There is it comes in validation mode as combined. You can check for albedo or metal. I haven't really figured out the metal bit yet, so I'm not going to tell you about it. That would be wrong of me. But that's the albedo bit. There we go, 50 and 30. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. I haven't gone through every filter. I just wanted to, show you the filters were there, and they can do some great things. You could do all sorts of stuff with it, which you might think you'd need to do in Substance Designer, but you don't. You can do it here. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, ask me in the comments, and I'll talk to you another time.